What drives a person to turn love into tragedy? On a quiet night in July 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla, just 18 years old, was behind the wheel with her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their close friend, Davion Flanagan, in the car. The scene would soon be anything but ordinary. In a terrifying moment, Mackenzie accelerated to 100 miles per hour, heading straight for a concrete wall. The crash was brutal, leaving no time for survival. Dominic and Davion were killed instantly. Mackenzie miraculously survived with only minor injuries. But this wasn't just a random accident. It would send shockwaves through the community, leaving everyone asking, why? What was going on in her mind? What led up to this moment of chaos and death? Was this an impulsive, tragic mistake, or was there something far more profound at play? In the months that followed, investigators uncovered chilling details. What looked like a young couple's love story had darker, more disturbing layers. Mackenzie, a talented high school athlete, seemed to have everything going for her, yet underneath it all, something seemed off. Was it a betrayal? Was there a history of emotional turmoil and anger that nobody could see? The questions only grew as the truth became harder to uncover. As we unfold the events leading up to that night, one thing becomes clear: this story will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and the human mind. What happens when the people closest to you turn out to be someone completely different than you imagined? Stay with us as we dig into a case that will leave you questioning the very nature of trust and the dark corners of the human heart. In 2022, a seemingly ordinary teenager, Mackenzie Shirilla, shocked the world when she turned her car into a deadly weapon, killing her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their close friend, Davion Flanagan. On the surface, it appeared to be just another tragic accident, a young girl behind the wheel, speeding down a quiet road, and suddenly crashing into a concrete wall. But investigators soon discovered this wasn't just a moment of reckless driving. This was something far more disturbing, a story that would leave everyone questioning the truth behind the crash. It was a tale of obsession, control, and a hidden rage that had been building for months, perhaps even years, beneath the surface of a life that appeared perfect from the outside. It was a warm summer night in Cleveland, Ohio, and nothing seemed amiss as Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davion spent time together. To the outside world, they were just another group of young friends living their lives, laughing, and sharing memories. Mackenzie and Dominic had been in a relationship for some time, and Davion, their close friend, was always there. They were inseparable, three young people who seemed to have everything going for them. But that night, everything would change forever. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Mackenzie was driving. The night felt like any other, but as she sped down the road at over 100 miles per hour, something was brewing inside her that no one could have seen coming. The tires screeched, the sound of the engine roaring, and silence. The car crashed violently into a wall, and in the blink of an eye, 2 young lives were gone. Dominic, a young man full of potential, and Davion, a friend who had always been there, were both taken instantly. Their families, their friends, everyone left in shock, reeling from the loss of 2 promising young lives. But the tragedy didn't end there. As police began investigating the crash, they discovered something far darker than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a simple accident. Something else was at play here, hidden behind Mackenzie's life's smooth surface. On the surface, Mackenzie appeared to be just another high school student, an athlete with potential, a girl with a bright future. She had everything to live for, yet beneath that seemingly perfect exterior was a profoundly controlling nature, a simmering jealousy, and a relationship with Dominic that had become more toxic than anyone had realized. Dominic's family described him as a kind, ambitious young man, always striving for greatness. He was loved by everyone who knew him, and his future seemed as bright as the sun. Davion, too, was described as loyal, a friend who would go out of his way to help others. He was the person you could always count on, and his bond with Dominic and Mackenzie seemed unbreakable. But when the police began to look deeper into Mackenzie's actions in the days leading up to the crash, the picture began to shift. What had seemed like a perfect relationship was a delicate balance of control, manipulation, and dependency. As investigators reviewed Mackenzie's social media and text messages, it became clear that her relationship with Dominic was not as healthy as it appeared. Mackenzie's controlling tendencies began to emerge, the signs of possessiveness that no one had noticed at first. Her jealousy seemed to grow as Dominic and Davion's friendship remained strong, a bond that Mackenzie felt threatened by. Accuses, arguments, and subtle manipulations painted a picture of a relationship on the brink of collapse. She wanted Dominic for herself, and that was becoming clearer with every passing day. The friendship between the three of them, once a symbol of unity, had begun to crack at the edges, and no one could have predicted just how far Mackenzie was willing to go to maintain control over the situation. This wasn't just an accident on a quiet Cleveland street, it was the tragic result of a toxic relationship, one in which obsession and control overtook everything. Mackenzie, a teenager with a seemingly everyday life, was suddenly at the center of a devastating crime. The love that should have been a source of joy and support had become an obsession that consumed her. What happened that night in that car was not just an impulsive outburst but the final act of a relationship that had turned dark, where one person's need for control ultimately led to two innocent lives being lost. As the investigation unfolded, the emotional scars of the tragedy spread across Cleveland, especially for the families of Dominic and Davion. They were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, holding on to the memories of two young men who had so much potential but whose lives were cut tragically short. Everyone who knew them felt the loss. For Dominic's family, their hearts were torn apart as they tried to make sense of how their son, their brother, could be gone in an instant. For Davion's family, the shock was equally devastating. How could this happen to their son, their friend, their cousin? And for those who loved Mackenzie, how had it all gone so wrong? This case is not just about an accident, it's about a warning. It reminds us that relationships, no matter how perfect they may seem on the outside, can be far more complicated than we realize. Control, jealousy, and obsession can destroy even seemingly innocent bonds. What happened that night is a painful reminder that sometimes, those closest to us may be hiding a darkness we can't see until it's too late. So, what pushed Mackenzie Shirilla to make that deadly decision? What was lurking beneath the surface of a life that appeared perfect? Could this tragedy have been prevented? The answers lie in the layers of emotion, obsession, and manipulation that were carefully hidden until the moment of the crash. Stay with us as we begin to unravel this chilling, tragic story. The truth is more complicated, and far more disturbing, than anyone could have imagined. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were young men with much potential and life ahead. At 20 years old, Dominic was already starting to carve out his place in the world. Known for his natural athletic ability, he dreamed of going further, whether through college or sports, and wanted to be more than just a guy in a small town. His magnetic personality drew people in, his friends and family spoke of him as someone with a heart of gold. He was loyal, supportive, and always ready to lend a hand. His relationship with Mackenzie had once seemed like a symbol of young love, innocent, pure, and full of promise. He had a future. But that future was shattered in an instant when Mackenzie drove her car straight into a concrete wall, taking him from everyone who loved him. Then there was Davion Flanagan. At just 19 years old, Davion had so much promise. He was loyal, hardworking, and had the kind of infectious energy that could lift anyone's spirits. He wasn't just Dominic's best friend, he was a brother who stood by Dominic through thick and thin. They shared memories that stretched back years, late nights, inside jokes, and dreams for the future. The bond between Dominic and Davion was the kind that most people only dream about, and to those who knew them, it seemed unbreakable. But Davion, too, would fall victim to Mackenzie's deadly decision. He had been caught in the crossfire of a relationship that was far more toxic than anyone realized. As the investigation would later reveal, Dominic and Davion weren't just victims of a tragic accident. They were victims of a deepening dysfunction, a relationship that had become increasingly unhealthy, but none of them saw it coming. Mackenzie, once a close friend, had turned into a force that would destroy everything they held dear. The truth was far more complicated than anyone expected, and their deaths left a hole in the lives of their families, friends, and everyone who knew them. It wasn't just a crash, it was a senseless loss of 2 young lives that had so much more to give. Mackenzie Shirilla seemed like any other teenager when she first crossed paths with Dominic and Davion. At just 18 years old, she was an athlete, a student, and, on the surface, someone full of promise. Growing up in Cleveland, she was known for her competitive spirit and bubbly personality. She was the kind of girl who seemed to have everything going for her. However, as those closest to her would realize, there was a much darker side to Mackenzie, one that very few people had seen. Mackenzie's personality began to reveal cracks that would eventually lead to tragedy. She was fiercely independent but in ways that soon became controlling. As her relationship with Dominic progressed, it was clear that Mackenzie wasn't just in love with him, she needed to control him. She would monitor his whereabouts, scrutinize his interactions with others, and obsess over his social media. There were moments when she seemed to smother him, as though any time spent away from her was a betrayal. At first, it was subtle. But as their relationship deepened, the control grew more suffocating. Text messages flooded Dominic's phone, each more demanding than the last. Mackenzie's jealousy, once small and manageable, began to consume her. She was constantly on edge, always questioning his loyalty and his commitment. And then, there was Davion. As Mackenzie saw it, Davion was a threat. He wasn't just a friend to Dominic, he shared a bond with Dominic that Mackenzie couldn't control. Their friendship had grown closer, and Mackenzie had trouble handling it. Little did anyone know, this simmering jealousy and possessiveness was building toward a breaking point that nobody could have predicted. As the months wore on, Mackenzie's behavior grew more erratic. There were signs that no one fully understood at the time, moments of intense mood swings, an overwhelming need to keep Dominic's attention solely on her. She may have seemed like a typical teenager in love with the outside world. But for those who knew her best, the relationship was becoming increasingly toxic, a dangerous mix of love, obsession, and control. Mackenzie had become someone no one recognized. And yet, it was hard for anyone to see the full extent of what was brewing within her. In the beginning, Dominic and Mackenzie's relationship seemed perfect, like any young couple just starting. They were inseparable, at least on the surface. Mackenzie was Dominic's first real love, and he was all in for a time. Their connection seemed genuine, and to Dominic, Mackenzie was the person he wanted to build his future with. But as the relationship progressed, the cracks started to show. What was once a loving relationship turned into something unhealthy that Dominic found more complex and challenging to navigate. It started with small things. Mackenzie wanted to know where Dominic was all the time, checked in constantly, and wanted to be part of every aspect of his life. Then came the jealousy. Every interaction with another woman was a potential threat in Mackenzie's eyes. A simple conversation with a friend would spark suspicion. And it wasn't just jealousy, it was control. Mackenzie had to be the center of Dominic's world, and the deeper he got into the relationship, the more trapped he felt. At times, Dominic tried to assert himself and set boundaries, but Mackenzie's need for control was too strong. Their love wasn't just about two people who cared for each other, it became a battle for dominance. Dominic, the kind-hearted young man he was, never wanted to hurt Mackenzie, but as time passed, he felt like he couldn't breathe. He wanted out, but he didn't know how. He was caught in a relationship that seemed to have no way out. The more he tried to distance himself, the more Mackenzie tightened her grip, pulling him back with promises of love and apologies that only worsened the situation. Text messages between the two show a pattern of Mackenzie's emotional volatility. On one hand, there were declarations of love and longing. But on the other hand, there were accusations, demands, and threats. Her words were calculated, trying to trap him into a place where he felt he couldn't leave and felt guilty for wanting to breathe without her. Mackenzie wanted to be everything to him, his lover, best friend, and everything, and ultimately, she became his cage. Dominic sought solace in his friendship with Davion as the relationship strained. Davion had been his constant support, his sounding board when things with Mackenzie became too overwhelming. But Mackenzie couldn't see it that way. Davion wasn't just a friend to her, he was a rival. And in Mackenzie's mind, there could only be room for one person in Dominic's life. The explosive combination of jealousy, control, and obsession was building. It was only a matter of time before something, somewhere, snapped. And everything came to a head on that fateful night in July 2022. Stay tuned as we explore the moment that would change everything, the crash that claimed 2 lives and altered Mackenzie's future forever. When the world loses someone young, it feels like time stands still. And when it's 2 lives taken in a flash, the grief doesn't just ripple, it crashes over families, friends, and an entire community. That's what happened on that fateful night in 2022 when Mackenzie Shirilla drove her car into a concrete wall at 100 miles per hour, taking with her the lives of 2 young men, Dominic Russo, 20, and Davion Flanagan, 19. What should have been the start of a promising future for both of them turned into a devastating loss, one that no one saw coming. For Dominic's family, the shock was unbearable. His parents had watched their son grow into a young man with big dreams who was always full of life and potential. He wasn't just their son, he was a beacon of hope. As his father often shared, Dominic's magnetic charm made him stand out. Dominic made an impact, whether it was his talent on the sports field, his natural ability to lead, or the kindness he showed to everyone he met. His mom, who had always been his biggest supporter, was left grappling with the cruel reality that the son she had nurtured and cared for wouldn't be coming home. An overwhelming emptiness overshadowed the love and pride they felt for him. For Dominic's younger siblings, the loss was a devastating blow. They had lost not just a brother but a role model. In his eyes, they saw a future of possibilities, a glimpse of the person they could grow into if they followed his example. Now, they would have to navigate a world where their brother's laughter and guidance were no longer present. The emptiness left in their lives was profound, a void that nothing could replace. They were left with memories of a brother who had always been there, always ready to lend a hand, always full of life. That vibrant energy was gone, and with it, a piece of their hearts. Davion's family, too, was left in shock. His mother, a loving and devoted parent, could hardly believe that the son she had raised with so much care and dedication was gone. Davion had been more than just a son, he was her confidant, her joy. To his father, he was a dream for the future, someone who had the drive to achieve anything he set his mind to. They were supposed to grow old together, making memories and building a legacy as a family. Instead, they were forced to face the heart-wrenching reality that their beloved son and brother were no longer with them. For his younger brother, the grief was even more complicated to bear. The sense of loss was sharp and painful. Davion wasn't just someone he looked up to, he was a friend and a constant in his life. Friends of both Dominic and Davion felt the blow of this tragedy just as profoundly. They had lost their closest companions, the people they trusted most. Dominic's friends couldn't imagine life without his unwavering loyalty, sense of humor, and ability to unite a group. The hole left by his absence was equally painful for Davion's friends. Davion had been the glue that held his circle together, always there to support, encourage, and make them laugh when things seemed impossible. His smile, his energy, his optimism, they were all gone in an instant. The mourning didn't just belong to families, it stretched out across a community of young people who had shared their hopes and dreams with these 2 young men. But even as the grief enveloped everyone who knew them, Dominic and Davion's legacies lived on. It's impossible to capture the full extent of their impact in just words, but how people spoke about them, how they remembered their kindness, loyalty, and humor, was a testament to the depth of their character. Dominic wasn't just remembered for his athleticism but for making people feel seen, heard, and valued. He had a rare ability to make you feel like you mattered, no matter who you were. Davian, too, left behind a legacy of love and devotion. His friends and family spoke of him as a loyal companion and a bright light in a world that could sometimes feel dark. His memory would live on in every moment he shared with those who loved him. As the shock of the loss slowly gave way to painful reflection, a stark reality set in: tragedy had struck, and there were no easy answers. Why did it happen? Was there anything that could have been done to prevent it? These questions haunted those left behind. Could they have seen the warning signs of a toxic relationship? Could they have intervened somehow and helped Mackenzie before things escalated beyond control? It's a question that everyone in Dominic and Davian's circle asked themselves. In hindsight, there were signs, but they were easy to overlook. Love is often clouded by the things we want to believe. But now, as everyone tried to move forward, those questions remained. This wasn't just a story of an accident. It was the story of love gone wrong, of control, jealousy, and unchecked emotions leading to devastating consequences. The emotional scars left on those who knew Dominic and Davian would never fully heal. Their families, their friends, they would carry that grief with them forever. But there was a quiet understanding that their lives, though tragically short, had left behind something more meaningful: lessons. The lessons about recognizing toxic behavior, understanding the complexity of relationships, and knowing that love can become dangerous when it becomes possessive or controlling. As we reflect on their lives and the pain that followed, the questions loom large: what can we learn from this tragedy? How do we recognize the signs of a relationship that is no longer healthy? How do we protect ourselves, and the people we love, before it's too late? These are questions that, in the wake of such a loss, can feel impossible to answer. But perhaps the most important lesson is that life is fragile, and love, while beautiful, must always be built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Only then can we avoid falling into the traps of jealousy, manipulation, and obsession that can lead to such heartbreaking consequences. As we close this chapter, we're left with an unsettling question: what do you believe happened? Was Mackenzie's tragic decision a cold, calculated act driven by jealousy, control, and an unhealthy obsession, or was it simply an explosive outburst, a moment of loss of control that spiraled into something irreversible? The events that night raise more questions than answers. Was this a planned act of violence, or did emotions run so deep that a single moment of rage turned into a deadly catastrophe? The complexities of love, trust, and human behavior are often murky, and cases like this leave us grappling with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, the most devastating outcomes can stem from the most unexpected places. We want to hear what you think. Do you believe Mackenzie's actions were deliberate, or was it an impulsive outburst that went too far? Were there warning signs along the way that no one saw? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts could illuminate an aspect of the case we haven't considered. If you're fascinated by this case and others like it and want more in-depth looks into the stories that capture the darkest sides of human nature, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll keep bringing you these chilling stories, exploring the mysteries behind the headlines and examining the minds of those involved. You won't want to miss the twists and turns that await. For our next episode, prepare for a chilling story about a seemingly perfect family whose life is torn apart by a betrayal no one saw coming. It's a story of trust shattered, a family destroyed, and a truth that's hard to stomach. Join us next time to find out how everything unraveled.